Welcome back, everyone. I'm Mary Claire, and welcome to Peak, the official Grow Sport podcast. Brian, welcome back.
Good to be back.
We are continuing our next series. It's focused on the book, Brian, that you most recently wrote, The Culture Code. We talked last time, for the viewers that didn't see the last video or podcast, we really talked about why this book, why you wrote it now, and kind of how to use it, so to speak.
Yeah.
We're now going to go chapter by chapter. And as we talked about, we're trying to create as many resources as we can for leaders out there to create change in their organization, create alignment, engagement, and accountability in the organization. So we've got the book, we've got a series of videos on our website, we've got an app. But again, we're going to keep diving as deep as we can for listeners out there. And the next step in that is to go chapter by chapter. So game on. Here we are.
Super cool. Excited.
All right. Okay, so we're going to just start with the introduction. And this is really focused on why culture wins. And we often say, Brian, that culture eats strategy for lunch. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to you. So why that saying? It's not, I know we didn't create it or you didn't create it, but that's the premise here. So why is culture so important?
Well, so let me just back up a little bit. And this is going to dive into my economist background and training a little bit as a social scientist. But it's interesting how often culture is invoked as a variable for outcomes that really matter. Like you say, oh, it's the culture of Singapore that really matters to its economic development, or it's the culture of fill in the blank that leads it to be less successful socially or economically. But when you really pull the lid off of the word culture, really the definition, what it really is it's just the way you do things. It's the rules of the game. They can be formal rules. They can be informal rules. They're the institutions that exist inside your society or your organization. So what it does is it dictates how you interact. It dictates what you do, what you say, the decisions you make based on the things that you care about, right? That's why things like mission, vision, values are so important, is because they sort of they define who you are as an organization. But here's the most important reason that culture matters. You can go into any organization and one time change behavior, because it could be forced, it could be fear, it could be all kinds of reasons. And in a one-off, one time, they change. The problem is that if it's not something that is part of their DNA, if it's not something that they know how to do over and over and over again, the organization becomes a one-hit wonder. It becomes a one-off in a success. And you've seen this all the time, where you get, they succeed at a short period of time, and then over a long period of time, they fail. You can tell the organizations that have deeply embedded performance in their culture because they continually come back over and over and over again. Apple is a great example of this right now. And so what you're really trying to do is, the reason culture beats strategy is because strategy changes constantly. Things always happen. If you don't have a great culture behind your strategy, you won't implement it well. And if you don't implement strategy well, it won't be successful.
Yeah.
So you can come up all day long with great ideas, but if you don't have a strong execution culture behind that, it's not going to matter. So what we're really trying to do is get to a point where you can replicate success over and over. Peak performance isn't about getting there one time. It's about staying at the top of the mountain. And that means that you have to keep doing things that bring excellence over and over and over again until it becomes so embedded in the DNA that it happens naturally. And then notice what happens. If you get great culture, it self-selects for those who care about that culture and who then come and reinforce that culture. So the culture will then determine everything: who you hire, who stays, what decisions you make, how you go about your challenges and problems. All of those things become driven by your culture. That's why it's so important.
So for leaders out there who think they might have a performance challenge, and how do they know it's a culture challenge versus something else?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah,
that's a great question.
By performance, I mean, we keep setting goals that we can't hit, or we keep starting initiatives that we can't complete, or that don't turn into anything.
Yeah. So how do you know that that's a culture problem?
Yeah.
Here's the answer. It's always a culture problem. This is what it's actually very freeing in a lot of ways, because what you can do is you'd be like, This isn't because of some external issue. If it were just an external issue, we would already know what response to take based on our culture that we'd already have very high confidence in because we
Yeah.
know what to do relative to those
Yeah.
incentives or impetuses that come to us. When we get into a position where like, I don't know why I'm performing badly, that's always a culture problem. And the issue there becomes, all right, if we really dissect where we are, we're not making the decisions that lead to the outcomes that we want to have happen every time.
So culture drives results, in other words.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep, that's right.
Um, Talk to me then about we talk so much about strategy in the model, yet this is actually a culture. This is actually a mechanism by which to adjust culture. How should I think about it as a leader? What am I going to get when I read this book, when I run the model? What am I going to get out of it?
It's so interesting because so many companies think of strategy as something to be discovered at a moment in time. Like, oh, I'm going to sit down with my executive team, and today we're going to discover our strategy, right?
Yeah.
When in fact, strategy is a living, breathing thing with lots of moving parts, some of which are discovered inductively and others that are discovered theoretically, right? I mean, I might decide, oh, well, I'm going to try this and I think it might work. But until I actually go out and execute it, I don't really know. And so if I don't have a strong culture of execution, I'm never going to know anything about my strategy. It is true that I need to understand and think hard and be smart about what I put together as a strategy, but those two things have to be married. That's why we keep saying take your strategic intent and marry
Yeah.
it with your daily execution, because the two in isolation are they're useless. I can have a great strategy. If I don't execute, I don't know anything. I can have a terrible strategy, and if I execute great, I'm not going anywhere. I have
Yeah.
to have those two things together. And the culture really is the underlying foundation on which I can build both of those things. If I don't have a good, strong culture, then even if I get lucky and come up with a great strategy, and even if I execute it well for a period of time through fear or some other way, right? It's not going to be enduring. It's not going to last. It's not going to be something that I can grow or scale on over the long haul.
Okay, so Brian, we're talking a lot about culture in this conversation. Culture to me, you mentioned it's kind of the rules in any organization or society. It's kind of the rules of the game, so to speak. That still feels really squishy.
Yeah.
And as a leader, I'm like, of course I need to have good culture. I'm going to roll my eyes.
Yep.
So let's talk about the model a little bit and how does this actually help me develop a good culture that
Yeah,
drives
no, that's a
results?
great question. So here's where the actual process itself generates culture and where culture reaffirms process. This is a virtuous cycle and a self-reinforcing
Okay.
cycle. So if I look at this, I'm like, okay, you know what? I want a culture that is aligned and engaged and accountable. That's how I want to define my culture, which, by the way, I think are the three main components of a great culture. And then you're like, all right, what steps do I need to take to build that culture? Well, first of all, you might say, all right, SPORT as an acronym, as a process, is designed to create those rules of the game, of the road, that make it possible for us to have a great culture. So we say, first of all, let's get strategically aligned. That's going to help us get aligned, right? So
Yeah.
what does that mean? That means that we set up our primary goals on our objectives, that we get strategic goals that result in primary goals, that we get day-to-day activities that result in our goals, that we hold each other accountable for those. We get strategically aligned, right? And then we say, all right, I want to make sure that I have all of the skills necessary to reach those outcomes. So I start thinking about a culture of continuous improvement, of great hiring, of growth and development, of training, which we call personal development. So that then creates the steps we take to create that environment that maximizes our human talent. And then we say, all right, I need to execute well every day. And that's the O, that's the operational execution. So we focus on how do I make sure that my standard operating procedures are correct, that we've got them in the right place, that we know what they are, that we're innovating around those standard operating procedures, and that everybody is working on those. That would be the O. And then we say, all right, we got to be accountable. That's a key part of that culture. So we implement a methodology around that accountability every week. We're going to take commitments. We're going to report on commitments.
Yep.
We're going to report on our scoreboards. Everybody's going to own their space. They're going to be the CEO of their own space. We're going to take steps to make sure that everybody is accountable. And then that last T, the team strength, we're going to be like, let's make sure we're sharing those best practices. Let's make sure that teams are elevating across the organization. And again, now you can see these self-reinforcing processes create rules and culture that turn into our DNA. So it is done stepwise, one thing at a time, creates the rules and the organizational structure by which we develop a very strong culture.
Well, I think I'm a very linear thinker, and I think that's probably part of the reason I enjoy the model is it aligns with it's methodical, but
Yep.
but you're coming back to it all the time. It's not a one and done. It's not a we'd make some decisions and put it on a shelf. So okay, well, we're going to continue the conversation on culture next time as we dive into chapter 1. But Brian, thanks so much for spending a little time with us today, giving us an overview, and looking forward to the next conversation.
So good. Thanks so much.
Thanks to all of our listeners. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please like it and follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, we hope you enjoy your drive toward peak performance.